So we have a very unique value proposition because many of the digital efforts and prescriptive analytic efforts don't quite drive or result in value because they are not quite looking at what is causing the actual difference. So we bring the mining expertise together with our digital and prescriptive analytics expertise to make sure that connection is made and the value is realized for the long term. Data Stories is a global analytics software service provider. They are with us since 2021. Team of highly experienced data scientists and who have worked across industries, but more in mining and metals, and very user-friendly self-service analytics software. That's what they have developed, which is Visual Expert, which basically prescribes online optimization for throughput, emissions, recovery, different areas. And it learns continuously how the processes are working and updates and provides suggestions. User-friendly, as I said before. And when we leave, it's managed and owned by your team. So it's not something where when we leave, you cannot use. We train your people and make sure that it provides value for the long term, which is our value proposition. The software can apply for throughput, recovery improvement, increase the throughput rate, accelerate that, efficiency gains, and reduction in variability, which is very important in plants and refineries and concentrators, and reduce costs. So it's a full service offering. And it's user-friendly, which can be applied across many different applications. Today, we'll focus on recovery.
Hello, everyone. So I would like to share a use case, one of the recent use cases completed engagements on applying prescriptive analytics for recovery improvement. Maybe just a few words to set up the context. We have been working with a base metal concentrator who has been struggling with declining performance over the last 12 months from the moment we started. They had multiple issues, really ranging from stockpile blending, processing, so yield and grade. The biggest issue was output variability on both recovery and on grade and on the total concentrate produced. One of the structural issues at the client was the highly variable ore composition, which could change really from day to day, and the problems with stockpiling did not make it easier. Another relevant thing to mention is that the client has been focusing on improving throughput. Of course, conventional wisdom says if you have the lower throughput, if we lower the throughput and we try to maximize, the recovery will be higher because we can grind our ore finer. So here there were multiple initiatives maximizing throughput, but as a consequence, the variability of the throughput and also of the stress on mining circuit and crushing circuit was so high that it just facilitated output variability. So one of the important outputs, maybe of insights of today's webinar, is that we should always optimize for profitability. So here the purpose was to increase recovery while instilling a new way of working using virtual experts, which are guiding operators for optimal decisions at every minute of every hour. So maybe jumping to conclusion, what is a tangible impact and why is it an important use case to share with you? So we have obtained improvements, and it's not just at the end of the engagement, but 3 months after the engagement. The total of 6% point improvement in recovery, which happened together with a massive increase in grade, so the quantity of valuable metal in total concentrate, and increase of the total concentrate produced, while having analytics insights embedded into daily operating practices. The total impact from this engagement is $40 million additional revenue per year. And we'll be happy to share with you how we did it. So just a little more context on this. So we have focused specifically on the most difficult circuit for the plant. It was a flotation circuit. And of course, the conventional wisdom is that the most important levers that are influencing the outputs would be first of all, the feed grade, so the grade and quantity of valuable metal in our ore, the throughput rate, and the flotation circuit parameters. One of the interesting insights from this project, but also from other projects, are that set points that we're using on a flotation circuit are tertiary influencer. However, they're responsible for 40% of the variability of the output. So given the grade and given the throughput, we still have a lot of freedom to optimize flotation set points to improve the outputs, even if we got the bad ore and even if the throughput was not on target. So what we did during the engagement, so worked along these three pillars. First, we improved the ore composition somewhat by optimizing and reducing variances in blending and stockpiling. So what you see here at the bottom graphs are just the graphical representations of the distributions of feed grade, so on the first column. And you see that it is slightly improved versus the baseline over the fifth month of our data. The second part, which is important, is that we stabilized the throughput rate. Stabilized and reduced it slightly. By reducing the throughput rate, and of course, we know that if we run it with a low throughput, we will have high recovery, but we will also produce less concentrate, so it's not going to positively impact profits. In this case, the optimal settings for the throughput rate have been more than, the reduction in the throughput rate has been offset by gains not just in recovery, but also in the total concentrate produced and the grade in this concentrate. The last part is the plant set points, so the flotation circuit set points, which are responsible for, again, almost a half of the output. We have also significantly stabilized them. We're talking about 12 different parameters at the flotation circuit. We focused on them. And the idea behind virtual experts in general, and also in this use case, is that we can manage and change dynamically the set points on the flotation circuit given the incoming ore and the incoming throughput, grind it in a certain way to always get the best output. So how exactly did we do it? And this is an illustration of what advanced analytics and prescriptive analytics is doing. We started, so there is a schematic representation of our flotation, of the entire processing plant. On the left side, we have inputs. We took 1 year of historical data. It was more than 500 different plant variables. Technological parameters, data from sensors, information from lab assays, which are showing us ore and feed properties, all calculated properties. As the outputs, which we call key performance indicators, we of course need to consider profit at first. And one of the most important factors defining profit for us would be the quantity of total concentrate. This was an explicit output that we considered. The grade in this concentrate, so what is the fraction of valuable metal in our concentrate? And then recovery and recovery variability. Again, you always get what you optimize for, and we do not want to just increase recovery for the purpose of recovery. We want to improve profit. That's why we want to consider these objectives, which are potentially competing together at the same time. Once we build predictive models, we discovered in this case that there is actually only 12 input parameters from the left-hand side that are influencing and explaining or predicting, if you want, the outputs. And these 12 are, of course, the feed grade, the throughput rate, and then 10 flotation inputs. Once we get reliable predictive models, we can use them for prescriptions. We can reverse engineer predictive models, implement them if you want for daily operations. So on the right, you see a schematic of our circuit. So we are interested in KPIs in the recovery that we have at the end of the flotation circuit. At any point in time, in this case 3 hours, we set the current values from the upcoming batch. So this would be feed rate, float feed, grade, and the 10 parameters. The model at each point in time takes the values of the planned 12 parameters, and I know that I cannot change the feed rate, I cannot change the throughput rate anymore, it happens before the flotation circuit, but I can in principle go and change the flotation set points. So first of all, the model immediately gives us a prediction of the expected recovery that we will get and recovery variability in 3 hours from now at the end of the flotation. This is the first insight, an instant prediction of the result. And the second point is that it gives us the recommendation of how to change the parameters, flotation parameters, to get an improvement, an estimation for this improvement. So later on in what we can do, just if we scroll a little bit down, we see that for each moment, so each 2-hour interval when I make these predictions, we can also estimate what was the expected recovery and what is the improved recovery through dynamic changing of flotation set points. So this is a little bit how, explains you how the virtual expert operates. For technology engineers, if you scroll even down, if you want to see this information probably would not be interesting to the operators, you can also explore. So the underlying model is not a black box. You can see in real time how would it operate and what would happen if you change any of the input parameters, so as sliders, and what would be the expected impact. And just wanted to share with you a couple of additional insights. These insights are from the same project, but again, we see this repeating in all engagements we do in metal and mineral processing. Less is more. What we often observe, and this is a graphical representation for this particular example, that first of all, so on these complex graphs, you see actually these are all plus signs, and we put a plus sign when we notice that the set point has changed. And they are sorted in the order in which of the frequency of changing the set points. You see that some of the flotation set points have been changed, being changed every 2 hours, some others every 9 and 10 hours. But what we notice is that sometimes operators are attempting to stabilize the circuit by changing the parameters often. However, it does not improve the stability, but actually makes it less stable. And this is an illustration on the right of the actual recovery for the same time period. So the first insight is maybe we should not touch the circuit unless it is really necessary. Stability, there is a bit instability, and this is another insight of that we wanted to share from our analytics implementations. Next, just very interesting insight that we wanted to share is that less is still more. And very often we notice that when we have chemical processes, and in this case we add reagents to the flotation circuit, the optimal settings for the reagents, if we really simulate it on a certain interval, and if we look at the optimal settings and sum them up across all reagents, are 36% less, so require a reduction in reagent use for a higher recovery. So what we see here is the black line is the actual recovery, the light blue line is the improved recovery. We see that we can recover better but use less reagents. This is another, again, counterintuitive insight, and which you want the operating team to internalize and own it. Initially, it is counterintuitive, and in this case, the team went in just 4.5 months' time from the insight, we will never run our plant like this, to actually running our plant like this. I would like to finish with more general insights from our analytics work across the processing plant. The first most important thing is to not optimize for individual KPIs, but optimize for profit. For every processing plant, depending on its setup, commercial obligations, fines we pay if we do not meet a certain grade targets, emission targets, we will have an optimal combination of recovery and throughput and optimal profit. And we can just assess and identify those optimal targets using the data. The second one maybe just to finish, what is important is that the historic data gives us a possibility to look at the holistically on our business, not just look at narrow, just one particular circuit, like flotation here, but really take the entire value chain and find optimal targets for business. And then use prescriptive analytics again to maintain those optimal targets, to make sure that we are at the best possible output, irrespectively of what kind of ore are we getting. The other insights are: do not pursue maximal recovery, well, just to support it, or maximal throughput blindly. There is an optimal combination of these parameters, and we need to look at them as a whole. Like in this example, we had explicit target, total concentrate produced needed to be maximized. So we were not allowing to lose on the total concentrate, we were not allowing to lose on the grade, and we wanted to maximize recovery. And the last one is: do not underestimate the power of stability. We didn't present it here, but in all engagements, after all implementations, we can really boldly claim, if you want, that we are reducing variability of the outputs by 40 to 60%, because operating stability delivers big output benefits. Analytics part of the engagements is very easy. These are just numbers and algorithms. What is difficult is changing behavior. And without changing behavior, it's not enough just to give people recommendations to follow. We need to help people change behavior, internalize and own these recommendations, and make sure that they know that this is their decision to go and adjust the set points, because it will give us the best output.
So we're jumping into section 3, which is around advice on how to take that journey from data to dollars. So if we want to jump to the next stages, a couple of messages before I jump in that I would, universal messages that I would emphasize is: one is that this does not take years to do the program, similar to what Katja displayed, but creating value from prescriptive analytics, you should be thinking in months, not years. I think often these efforts can get crushed when they get stretched out too long, and speed and momentum is your friend when you're trying to execute these things. So they can be executed much faster than you expect. And we'll take you through a typical or illustrative timeline here. But the idea here is these steps are kind of stage gates we would recommend to anybody. And we would really recommend around breaking it up into stage gates with defined criteria to proceed to the next one, because again, this kind of false starts and stop and starts is not helpful for building momentum and getting execution going. So you want to make sure you're ready for the next phase before you go into it. When we do these kind of programs, we always start with what we call a high value check. Whether you're getting help from an external party or whether you're doing it yourself, you want to make sure before you get into it that you're, the purpose of this step is kind of asking ourselves 3 questions. One is, is it possible? Do we have the data? Can we actually do this? Number 2 is, is there enough value there to warrant the effort? Is it worth proceeding? And then number 3 would be, is it the right move for the particular client to do? And if the answer is yes, 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 then you would, proceed on to the next level. So really, in terms of the high value check, what we're trying to get a sense of there, we're typically doing some analysis of the client data, trying to understand, generally understand the operation. Where's the bottleneck? What other factors do we need to know? Ideal world, we're getting to, see the control room operators, see the operations in real life to understand what operations is like. And then there's 3 main activities going on during these high value checks before you start any substantive work. One is really figuring out, what's the health of the data? Is the data ready to do this exercise? And again, this is kind of your first high level click. It's not necessarily going down into the micro level of detail, but just checking of, do we actually have decent data? Can we do this exercise? The second one is trying to get an indicative estimate of what's the value potential here. What's incremental production worth, and do we think the opportunity would fall within like high, medium, or low potential? So you're looking at things like, what's the variability of your input feed? What's the variability of the output grades and recoveries? How frequently are set point changes? Consistency across the crews. Does a new operator come in and start changing all the settings to the way they like it? So all these things, those are some illustrative examples, are the things we look for and the things you should be looking for when you're trying to get a sense of how much potential improvement is there in recovery, for example. And then you also want to assess how hard is this journey going to actually be. trying to get a sense of, what are the other competing priorities, level of buy-in and alignment around the leadership team and the key stakeholders at a site. Do they have, negative attitudes towards the stuff from day one that you're going to need to overcome? And, have there been any other previous attempts? Ultimately, what's the big one is what's the maturity of the system, the management system as a whole, and the management practices. So, in a couple of days, you should be able to get to that, the answers to those three questions of, is it possible to proceed? Approximately what's the value worth if we do proceed? And is this the right move for the site, or is there other stuff that's more important for the site right now? And so if you answer yes, then you would go to the second stage in our process, which we call assessment. And so typically in the assessment phase, what you want to be doing there is, you're really kind of looking at the vast arrays of data, understanding the critical variables, what's driving, what do the correlations look like, and really kind of honing in on what's the focus area. So in Katja's example, they quickly honed in on these 12 set points within the flotation circuit. So they weren't trying to control the entire plant using prescriptive analytics from day one. You're really trying to hone in on a core focus area. And then in those areas, you're doing the more in-depth, deeper dive into the data check. And you're trying to get, really sense the data in that particular area. What's the data look like? Is it going to be good enough? Are there some tasks that we need to take? Is there work plan we need to have to improve some data if we've got some gaps? And then you're also doing a more detailed assessment of all the key enablers that'll determine whether your program is going to be really easy or really difficult to implement. So, often between any of these stages, there may be a short pause to get, set the table, if you will, for the next stage. But, again, it's making sure you're ready to go before you continue to the next one. In the third proof of value stage, this is when we're actually, rubber hits the road in terms of building out the model. So this is where you're building that first working version of the model, getting those critical variables right. You're taking that model and you're testing its accuracy using historic data. You're engaging with the subject matter experts in that particular area to make sure the drivers make sense, make sure the outputs make sense. And then typically what we do here is we'd actually simulate the plant's operation over a year using historic data to say, okay, how do you run the plant? How would the model predict you should run the plant? What's the delta between the outcomes you would get if you were running it based on model prescriptions versus doing it based on how you ran it, to really refine, what's the size of the prize in terms of the ROI. And so typically when you're coming out of that proof of value, you've confirmed the accuracy of the model, you've validated it with the subject matter experts. You got a more confident number of what the benefits and return on investment is for implementation. And you've got a decent plan around implementation. You know specifically what tweaks to the model that you want to do, as well as what are all of the changes you need to make to the management systems, to the routines, to the behaviors, to people's KPIs and roles in order to successfully implement. That's essentially the proof of value stage. And again, we're talking a month and a half here, ballpark, of when you've got a working model and you're ready to start actually executing and creating value. So then that takes us to the last phase. So once you've got all that, once you can tick all those boxes, only then would I start with the implementation. And here is where you're starting to put that model into live operation. And again, as Katja flagged, what you're doing is the model's recommending or prescribing actions for people to take, but the operators are always in control. So they're either accepting or rejecting. So you want to make sure, as you say, that you got like 80% acceptance rates plus before you think of automating any of the controls in the system. This is where you're making the transition to, we'll never run the plant like that. This is how we run the plant. So it's a lot of, refining the model, refining the playbooks with the operators, and it's a lot of change management. But ultimately here, you're making sure you're delivering the value, and you're engaging with the IT teams and the relative various stakeholders to make sure that there's a process in place to sustain it going forward, so that it's a long-term solution, not a short-term solution. And the one thing we always recommend in the early phases here is that you start thinking, once you start having that demonstrated value in one area, you start thinking of what's my scaling plan. As I mentioned before, time and momentum is a key thing for success here. So you want to, while the iron's hot, you want to start implementing in other areas where there's opportunities. So the last one here is just some lessons learned, and these are lessons learned either from scars on our back from our implementations, or coming into a site and picking up from where a previous effort might have faltered. So just really want to share with you some of the common pitfalls and tips to avoid them as you go on your own journeys here. So as anything good, we created a little top 10 list. Number 1 here is, start small and focused. We emphasized that earlier as, trying not to implement it across your whole plant, but starting with a very small focused area with a very, discrete set of set points, things that'll be high value. So you're not kind of biting off more than you can chew. Number 2 is, ready, set, then go. I think we emphasized it a fair bit as we went through those stage gates, but you want to make sure that, before you move, before you proceed from one gate to another, that, conditions are set for success in the next phase. Is, as I mentioned, false starts, delays, early failures and stuff really kill credibility of running a plant this way. And, as we'll talk later, that credibility is one of the critical paths to success here. Number 3, you want to make sure you avoid garbage in, garbage out. So you may not expect it when you start the effort, but typically preparing and cleaning the data can take as much time, if not more, than actually building the model that works and operates. So don't underestimate the time, and don't underinvest the time in making sure that the data is good and it's right, because if you're training the model with wrong data, you're gonna get some wonky results, and it can add a lot of extra time and cycles and rework if you don't clean it from day one. And then the next one, related to, the amount of effort required to clean the data, in reality, the model is only part of the solution. We find about 75% of the effort actually comes from the change management side, the human side of things. So, you're going to need to change your management systems. As I mentioned, you're changing KPIs, you're doing all sorts of, management routines, behavior management. That takes a lot of time and effort. So the lion's share of the lift in terms of implementation comes from that side. So make sure you're kind of prepared for that as you think about your journey, and don't underestimate it and underinvest. Number 5, putting the expert in virtual expert. So you've already got a lot of subject matter experts in your operation. So it's always important to have the subject matter experts working hand in hand with the data scientists. And there's often need for 2 things. One is someone there to be a bit of a translator to make sure they can speak the same language. And number 2 is making sure that your data scientists and your programmers actually understand the basics of mill operation, and they've got experience in mining. So it's not their first rodeo, because otherwise it becomes it's like trying to get people working together that don't speak the same language, and successful collaboration is key there. Next one is, hopefully some of these are emphasizing this, but alignment and trust building is actually the critical path. At the start, early days, there's going to be a lot of skepticism. And so you really need to be building that buy-in actively at every step. If you're not, people are waiting for the slightest little wrong prediction, and then it's, throw the baby out with the bathwater. So you just be expecting and actively manage that trust and buy-in as you go. Which leads to the next one, which is kind of obvious, but it requires a lot of human, not just machine learning. So you're going to need to have an actual training plan. It can't be a black box for operators, for supervisors, and all that. So have a training plan and a coaching plan. So it's not just, hey, we've got it operating, let's run a day of training and then see you later. But make sure you have an active coaching going forward in the early days, particularly. Related to all of these things, you're going to need some boots on the ground. So some dedicated people. If you're trying to do this with folks that are purely off-site data analytics team, you're just not going to have the time to do it. Firstly, don't lose sight on the business case. A lot of the times with technology initiatives in general, success is declared once the model's been implemented, and then you walk away. But stay and success is declared when the business case has been delivered, and make sure you don't lose sight of that. And then the last one is, as you get that success, look for scaling fast and harnessing that momentum.